and then unmute us so people have like a chance of hearing us, because that's a nice thing, right? It's not, we see your mouth moving but we can't hear you.
I love the delay looking at the two of me.
I always like comparing the two webcams, like, because the Skype one is like much more like tight on my face. Like there's more of my room around me on the actual Twitch stream.
Yeah,
So
it's like you're doing like headphone hair
yeah, you have to kind of think about these things. So welcome to Friday, anyone who's tuning in. I know several people that were like, oh, I can't wait for this one. I think this one has been long anticipated. So this was originally a kind of
and
co-sponsorship with the AMS Ludomusicology study group. They had that list of the reading club, book club, and when they found out about my stream, they're like, oh, you want to just host that? And I was like, yes. Because all of those were things I would have put on my list anyway. And and then you had a conflict, something like some
yes,
kind of like meeting that you had that you couldn't move because it was a committee or something. I don't even remember.
it was a committee meeting, or it was that part in the summer where I was changing positions at the same institution and going through the job search.
Right. I think that
There
is
were a
what
few
that
different
was.
things, and then I was teaching all day on Fridays, so at least all afternoon on Fridays in the fall semester, and then this semester I have this what's becoming weird Wednesday.
We both have long Wednesdays because, yeah,
Yeah,
your class meets from like,
2 till 5:50, and Wednesdays is also at RPI meetings day, so usually the morning is packed with meetings. We don't
mhm.
have a lot of classes that run on Wednesdays because we are on a Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday schedule, which is why some of my students are in class right now, and I'm like, I'll share the stream afterwards.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. The VOD will be available, and I will have a local recording of it that I can get to you if you need it. Um, and I promise everybody, when I come up to breathe, hopefully maybe a little bit during spring break, and then continually once I get my big commission done this spring, I do have everything to put on YouTube. Like there is a plan to make it permanently available for the things that have kind of fallen off, because Twitch only saves like 6 weeks worth or something. Um, so don't worry, that stuff is going nowhere. I'm going to get it up and just deal with the fact that the auto generated captions of YouTube are not the greatest for my voice, but editing them is pretty tedious. So that may be a stretch goal. Like in the long term, we'll eventually try to do a little bit of editing of some of those things. But at the very least, we will have the VODs available for everybody as a resource, because I know people have said they want to assign things and, oh, where do they live? So I want to facilitate that, because that's kind of the point of having all this is that it exists in a form that is consultable.
It just doesn't just sit on the internet forever.
Right. It doesn't just like exist on my computer and only on my computer. So and one of the nice things is, even if I get like it's not really a copyright strike in the same way that it would be on some platforms, but like if we're using game footage and it got like claimed, they don't take the video down. You just don't earn money from it. But I'm not planning to monetize my YouTube anyway, so I don't really care if that happened. There's processes by which a YouTube creator, whoever owns the content, can say, oh, that this is my stuff, and then they can take all of the whatever earnings from ads show up on YouTube, or they can, if they recognize that it's transformative, they can actually say like, oh, this person can have like 50% of it or whatever. But I'm not planning on like making money from really any of this. Like if I get a couple subscriptions here and there and eventually earn over the threshold on Twitch to like get a check at some point, which does happen. I think it took about a year from the moment we made affiliate on Ryan's channel, and then finally at some point you have to hit like $100 threshold, and then they're like, here you go. If that ever happens, I'm just gonna buy books with it. It's really just gonna be like, what edited collection just came out? Uematsu. That's over $100.
Well, I think it's like whenever we discuss when we're doing an edited collection or publishing our own books, and it's like here's the fragment of the sales that go back to the authors, and if it's multiple editors split 3 or 4 ways, it's like, oh, we can buy a coffee from that.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Like we do not do a lot of our work for the dollar bills. So, I'm so happy you're here, basically. It's been a long time coming. I had read this chapter multiple times. Right when the book came out, I was like, yes, Stardew. But I've assigned it, I've taught it. It's a really good pair with Elizabeth Hambleton's Leaving Lindau, because of the Soundwalking like comparisons. Of course, that one cites this one. But they end up being really good to pair to assign students, and they tend to like that week.
Yeah, I do that. I do the same pairing, and sometimes because I'm always a little awkward about citing my own work, I usually put in Bill O'Hara's Proteus article at the same time.
Yeah,
Because it works well as a unit, talking about mapping and sound and movement.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Yeah, so I've this is a long time coming. I'm really excited. Just like our background, I'm sure we met at Enacfigum, right? Or did we meet through like AMS music media stuff? I'm trying to remember which came first for us.
I think they came in both in the same year. I think it might have been AMS first, but then it was like Enacfigum. Terrible at pronouncing it. Enacfigum in Austin was only a matter of like a couple months afterwards.
So that was when Jim Bueller hosted, yeah. Chicken or egg, exactly. And I feel like I actually met you through non-Ludo people initially. I think it was more like media, like Jessica Getman, Reba, like, and they're like, you need to know Kate. Kate's amazing. And then I met you and I was like, yes, we vibe.
It's all a bit of an overlap. Like right now I'm in the middle of like green card application fun, and I have all these reference letters where everyone has to literally say when they met you. I'm like, was it in 2005? Wow, that seems like a long time ago.
It's the only time like the social media creepiness of like celebrate how long you've been friends with somebody on Facebook. Like that's the only time that's useful. So you're like, oh, I guess if we Facebooked right after this conference, we probably met at this conference. So, hello stream. I have the right coffee mug for today. It is my Stardew coffee mug. So, be proud of my wonderful coordination. Also, I'm wearing my shirt with the embroidered vegetables all over it, which folks have probably seen me post about on social media because I'm obsessed with it. It's got like carrots and radishes and stuff. Because we're talking about Stardew Valley. So tell me a little bit about where this came from. If I recall, Steve and Will reached out to authors to be in the book for the most part. I don't remember them doing a call for papers, but maybe they did.
It was kind of a reach out. So I think it was at the Enacfigum in Austin. We were all around playing games and talking about it. And I think the subject of the book came up, and they were just starting to reach out to individuals. And I knew I wanted to write on this and that it would be suitable. And so I wrote up what was a very extended abstract and sent it off to them. And I think that's how I got involved in the book. They wanted to go in that direction to have, I'd say, something a little different.
Yeah.
And so it was something that I hadn't presented at a conference before. It had been something I'd been thinking through. I had been playing and keeping notes, and just hadn't found a home for it yet. Thought about it going into my own book, and it's still probably a fragment of kind of additional research that will end up in the book that is still being written. And so it was suitable at the time, and this was back at just the start of my appointment at Wesleyan before I moved to RPI. But the way that academic publishing works is that this was a very quick kind of edited collection. By the time we submitted materials and got a lot of productive feedback, it moved pretty quickly.
Yeah, it really did.
And it came out just as I was starting at RPI in like the fall of 2019, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So with the changeover in the appointment, I'm curious, and this is just something I have no sense of in terms of like. First of all, is the RPI thing tenure track?
It is now.
Okay, it is now. So so do you get to like count this as part of your tenure dossier, or is it like considered part of your earlier appointment?
Because it was completed when I was at RPI, it's going to count, but the loophole of my appointment is I published a lot in the first 3 years when I was in a contingent renewable position, which helped with the conversion to tenure track, because I had a track record of research that was comparable to a tenure track line at a research and STEM institution. And so I get to count it, but the agreement is essentially I keep producing at the level I'm producing. So I have enough materials from that first 3 years that I could get tenure at another institution if I slowed down, but I've got to kind of keep kind of an even trajectory from this point onwards.
Yeah, just to like keep building up until and is the review in like 7 years or something?
Yeah, I'm not in a huge rush. Like I might ask about going up early if the book ends up being finished and out, and as kind of that kind of contingent plan. But a lot of institutions don't, especially if you've been at them and haven't moved between institutions in a tenure track position, don't tend to like love for people going up early, particularly because they want to know it's a surefire case. And so they don't necessarily want people to go up early if there's any chance that it could not happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Be as safe as possible in all these situations. So
not to mention it saves them a little bit of like money and stuff, right? I imagine like
exactly.
The appointment it comes with a change in pay grade probably.
Yeah, so. And I guess for me, I was on the kind of the job market for over a decade. This was the first year I didn't apply to anything, which says a lot. And so you could say I've never been in a rush, but at the same time, like what's 1 or 2 years really going to be in what's already been kind of a long burn advancement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to like walk people through that the decade process, because we've had a range on here. We've had folks that are still dissertating. We have, and it's funny. I ask mostly about the research itself, but that's something I need to talk more about, is people's journeys on the market, because that's like a useful thing for us to just be open and transparent about, and for other folks to kind of understand what they could be facing, and just to kind of normalize that like these experiences are all going to be so vastly different from person to person. And so much of the job market is like has nothing to do with you. You can have like the most perfect application, right? And there's just so much of it that's not in your control. And obviously every time that there is a rejection, you go back and you look at every single material and you think about what happened in interview portions, but so much of it has nothing to do with you, which is frustrating.
Oh, definitely. That's a whole other stream.
That's a whole other stream. But it is a good sense of just how long it can take, even for folks that it's mystifying to, especially grad students who are looking at that being like, oh my gosh, Kate's so productive. Like Kate has so many publications in the works. It seems like you're just constantly taking on projects. And you always have such interesting things that you're looking at too. You have a real kind of unique signature of the areas that you're working on. Like I often joke that even in the anonymous review for NACFM, I tend to know your papers. I've been surprised once or twice, but I tend to know what's going to be you.
I think this past year I was like writing it up. I'm like, this one's for you, Dana. Send.
Yeah, and it's very much like you do my style of stuff. I always welcome it. Some of the games that you have introduced me to, you and Elizabeth, both are folks that I always trust your game recommendations, because I do tend toward stuff like this that's very like open-ended. That is a little more like focused on the natural world and like soundscapey. And even though I haven't done a lot of that type of research myself, I'm so glad it's out there. So your training was ethnomusicology originally, right? Or was it a dual? Because you have all this ethnography background.
Yes. So I was in the last year. So University of Toronto had a joint musicology, ethnomusicology, music theory, master's and PhD program. And it was during my PhD that they separated off a separate ethnomusicology stream. And we all received an email from the graduate secretary one day saying, so choose your camp essentially. And I ended up just staying with musicology on paper because my primary advisor, Robin Elliott, was kind of identified as an ethnomusicologist. I was using a lot of ethnography in my work on Schaeffer's Patria cycle, but it was still kind of a canonic Canadian musicological topic. I was working in popular music studies, which kind of fell more in musicology and particularly in my approaches. And it was also less paperwork. And so I decided to make that particular decision and just kind of stay in that stream as they were separating off our degree programs, and what just essentially would show up on my transcript, because essentially I'd gone through my coursework in the dual degree thinking both about musicology and ethnomusicology, and primarily I presented almost exclusively at the Society for Ethnomusicology for conferences during grad school because my papers were getting into that conference and they weren't getting into AMS at that time. So I did kind of self-identify in both camps, and it was actually the final question at my 3-hour private doctoral defense where one of my committee members asked essentially like, so do you see yourself as a musicologist or an ethnomusicologist? And I answered with, I'm happy being a fence sitter, which was probably not the best answer. Just about at the moment they were going to go off to deliberate, but I was kind of done. I was trying to figure out what I was going to work on next. I was a little like Armory Schaefered out. Was
out.
looking at a year of adjunct teaching and kind of figuring out what my next steps were going to be. But I was also a little tired of answering the question, where do I fall? Because there's so much work that crosses over these disciplinary boundaries. We see increasingly scholars are going to both conferences and really benefit when all three societies are meeting together. And so I just kind of kept working in that vein. And when it came to like the job search again, I applied to musicology and ethnomusicology positions. I was a finalist for both types of positions. When I went to Wesleyan, it was hired as an ethnomusicologist. Archive definitely as someone who fell between in the cracks between the disciplines and was working in sound studies and media studies. So I just, at a certain point, stopped trying to kind of fit in a particular container and just worked across these boundaries, which benefited me in certain ways, but I know excluded me from other conversations or possibly other positions that were more kind of conservative in their descriptions.
Sure.
But also, those aren't the spaces where I would have kind of felt comfortable and probably excelled in anyways, because I didn't fit so easily, and that's fine.
Yeah. I noticed this year at AMS, in the triple conference in the program, I remember the early ones I went to, there was always, actually the first one I went to was the New Orleans one a decade ago. So it was very full circle to finally get to like present at that conference with Will, who I saw give a paper at the one 10 years before. It was like a whole thing. But that original conference, I remember it would say whether the session was like SEM, AMS, and then as a grad student, I could be like, oh, okay, maybe I'm scared of the theory paper. Like I could kind of like self-select from there. And I didn't see those divisions, at least not in the PDF version of the program.
No, I don't think they were there.
I don't think so this year. I think they finally eliminated that, even though obviously each conference contributed its own programming and the sessions were built from that. But yeah, I liked that it wasn't there. It did mean that there were a few times I walked into papers and was like really out of my depth, but I kind of like that. And it's actually something I recommend to people, especially that are early on. Go to something that's like really outside your wheelhouse. I always do at least one, like I call it a wild card paper, where I'm just like, okay, I have no idea what any of this is. I'm gonna feel stupid, but it's kind of humbling. Like, and I get some really interesting experiences out of making sure that I do that, because I think there's a lot of talk around, once you go to conferences for a long time, folks start being like, oh, I don't go to the papers anymore, I just come to see my friends. And like, that's great too, build your community, but I still go to the paper. I still like the papers.
Well, there's also something about doing that by choice. versus you accidentally read the program wrong and you end up in the wrong room, which has happened to me. I remember walking in, sitting down, ready for a session, and being like, oh, this is the Scarlatti panel.
Like, this isn't what I
I
was.
am not prepared for this, and I'm sandwiched in between many people. There's no getting up. And realized, I'm like, well, I'll learn something. And it probably part of it will be over my head, and that's fine. Or be digging into my knowledge from like first year undergrad.
Yeah. Like, what do I remember?
It's like testing my retention. But I'm also thinking back to the New Orleans conference. That was the last year, I think, that AMS and SMT were having those full 30-minute papers.
Mm-hmm.
And SEM has, at least as long as I've been involved, always did 20-minute papers. And so you also had the problem where you end up being on kind of one track or the other.
The sessions wouldn't align. That was so frustrating.
And it was in 2 hotels down Canal. And so there was often the situation where I was in one hotel and realized I was supposed to be in the next hotel for something and just never made it over, or made it over for something much later.
Yeah. Yeah. This past conference, I don't know if it was because attendance still wasn't as robust as it might have been in pre-pandemic years, but I went to basically everything that I intended to go to. I didn't hit that like as much of a wall with like, oh my God. I mean, there was a little bit of, I haven't conferenced in a while, this is exhausting, but I went to like most of the major things I wanted to hit. So I didn't come out with a lot of regrets of like, well, I wanted to see that, but I couldn't anymore. So that was a nice thing. So I'm hoping that, that's often a problem when you're especially in not fringe, but more like unique areas of study. It's like Ludo and disability will sometimes have panels at the same time, and I'm like, I can't force them to not schedule those at the same time, but it's frustrating when I have to make a choice between kind of my two main areas. So anyway, it was fun this year to do all that and to see. And you did Taylor Swift stuff this year.
Oh,
right?
Yes. It was partially because we were running behind and we knew we wanted to submit something, but we were all really busy and we were working on the Taylor Swift book. And so we essentially took materials from our book proposal and chose people that we knew were in the area or would have been going already or did present at the Swift Study Day to put together a kind of a panel of lightning talks, and also to see, we put it as a joint SMT, SEM, AMS panel as well to see whether it was going to stick with the crowd. And there was still a little bit of surprise that it was accepted, even though there's been a lot more diversity in programming across the 3 societies. But I think in grad school, especially in my master's, well, really in my PhD too, I probably never would have expected to see a Taylor Swift or something like that panel accepted across all 3 societies, just because that's not where we were at yet.
Yeah.
And so much of what we do now, I was kind of behind like Will Chang and Kiri Miller when they were kind of the first ones to kind of get it out there into those audiences. And even from this point on, I find that a lot of my work in media studies in general tends to be received in a more positive way in AMS programming now than in SEM. I put in for both conferences this year to kind of test those theories some more and see what happens. But there's like a few of us who are actively working in different areas of media studies in ethnomusicology and at SEM. But it tends to be still a bit more, at least right now we're back at a stage where there's a bit more silo in terms of area studies and country specific studies in a way that kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's more programming in that way. Sometimes it's more interdisciplinary, and it kind of shifts back and forth every few years.
Yeah. All good conversations. I'm really excited also. We'll get into the Stardew Valley, I promise. But I'm really excited about your soundscape book with Elizabeth Hambleton. I know just through the grapevine of people talking about writing those chapters for your book. I've been hearing about it kind of for a while now, so I'm just so excited. Where is that in the process? Is it kind of like awaiting?
So we're just finishing off some editing now. Okay. I admit I'm finishing writing my chapter for anyone who is...
Honestly, I think the editors often kind of put their chapter last because you want to get everybody else their comments back. And so you're like, mine can wait.
That's exactly it. And Elizabeth and I are going to be kind of passing it back and forth, or passing it to some of the friends who are in the book or not in the book, just to kind of get other eyes on them. And it was pretty much like foregrounding the editing, getting them in. So I've got the last couple. I think I see Pete on. I was like, I've got to send off Pete's after this or later today, because I think I've got both our comments now and things like that. And so we're kind of nearing the end of editing and working on the introduction and seeing if any of the chapters need some final edits, or whether they're things that we can keep track of. We're both coming off busy semesters and giving ourselves the summer to kind of finish off a lot of the editorial issues and putting the whole manuscript together. So
exciting.
So I think the plan is for like September 1st submission date. We just requested, originally it was like a May submission date, and that was just going to be a little too tight. So I think that we ended up, I think I've got 2 books that have a September 1st submission date, which was a terrible idea, but it will happen. And they're both manageable. But I realized when I was looking at my calendar, going, September 1st is always such a popular time, and I didn't, because I'm working, it's like Elizabeth and I, and then the other one is Krista Bentley and Paula Harper for the Taylor Swift book. So there's enough people involved in both projects that it makes it easier to go back and forth and finish them both up around the same time.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait for that one. Yeah, you will laugh to hear that originally the manuscript submission for the gender book was going to be April.
Hey, I made that deadline like I never made deadlines before.
No, and honestly, and Karen has new responsibilities and Michael has new responsibilities, and I'm just an adjunct who's doing too many things. So part of it, we don't have the first drafts from everybody, which, you know, I'm not like mad about it. It is what it is. I'm just too excited about like the array of topics and chapters that are in the book. And at this point I have a little bit of goodwill with Routledge, because the previous book was like to the letter, like the day we said it was going to turn in. And I think Lisa and I were nervous about as both being like kind of non-tenure tracky, like a little outsidery. We wanted to make sure that like we got some goodwill with the press there. But even then, like so much of it doesn't depend on the editors, right? You have all these contributors. There's a lot of moving parts. So I've already kind of been in conversation about, yeah, we're going to probably push this back, because like it's not worth jamming something through. It's like you want it to breathe. You want to have a good process with everybody. So yeah, we're still waiting on a few. The nice thing is it allows us to then like really look at each chapter in turn as it comes in and like give it some comments, but we're still waiting on some comments. We have Karen like did hers right away in January. For any of them that were in. And then like lately she's been like, has anything else come in? Because I'm going to be kind of slow at it. And I'm like, that's fine. You've had a lot going on.
That was like her for the Mammy special issue on video game music was the same thing. She got her revisions done so quickly. It was like the push just to get them, like, turn them over in like a week's time, and they were great. It's like, yes, that kind of necessary push to get them done and not fall behind, because other things are going to come up.
Yeah, exactly. So, and of course, Michael then had his move across the pond and is just settling into that position. He just sent us his chapter, actually. So speaking of the editors kind of waiting on their own, and like Karen's is new work, so she's like, mine's kind of progressing, but you know, it's like a whole thing. So that is to say, if some of you are like, I haven't heard back yet, not all 3 of us have done all of the chapters yet, but we're working on it, and don't worry, it's not personal. it's personal to us, not to you all. But yeah, we're gonna be, you're probably gonna see some things about that being a bit more flexible of a process, but it matters to us more, you know, the content than the timeline being this rigid thing. So obviously it can only move so much, and there's always going to be people that their life changes and they can't maybe commit to doing revisions, or the chapter just doesn't happen for whatever reason. Like I think that's a normal attrition that can happen, but we're going to do what we can to like stretch enough to make sure that like we keep people in the fold, because as I've said before, like almost every chapter that agreed to be in this gender sexuality book felt like a win to like get people to say yes and like entrust us with the work. So So excited. Welcome, folks that have logged in since. It's good to see. There was a lot of like just serendipity with meetings and things today for a lot of people saying like, yeah, I can come. Let's talk about Stardew. We've been just kind of doing the coffee talk.
I was rereading my chapter earlier today.
Brilliant. So you'll notice I have the font from the game, y'all. I don't always do that, but for Stardew I had to. So this is Soundwalking and the Aurality of Stardew Valley, an ethnography of listening to and interacting with environmental game audio. In Music in the Role-Playing Game, Heroes and Harmonies, edited by Will and Steve. This was 2019, and this is lovingly called the Green Book because the cover is green. So...
And I think the Soundscapes book is going to be like the boring regular Routledge, unfortunately. So it'll be like boring blue. I don't know.
Oh yeah, they don't always give you a lot of like cover design. Actually, for the animation book, Studio MDHR gave Lisa really pursued this permission to use like concept art from Cuphead as the cover,
nice.
And then they're like, "Oh, sorry, no, like you have to use whatever stock cover." And she was like, darn it. And she got all these permissions and everything. So we have it included as like a frontispiece before and so it's in there. We were able to like get all the legal stuff to put it in the front of the book. So like it's there. It's like an early, I don't know, tie down drawing. I don't speak animation as well as Lisa does, but like that's in there. And that was super cool. But the plan was to have that. It's like Cuphead in a little marching band uniform. So it was like kind of perfect. The plan was to have that as the cover, and then the press was like, oh, sorry, miscommunication. Like, you actually have to, like, you don't even get a choice. Like, this is the cover. So I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. It is what it is.
Yeah.
You might get more or less flexibility depending on if you're going into, like, a series that they publish. They often have, like, a set thing that they want to do.
Yeah, and there's sometimes some flexibility with the series, and also how much they think the book is going to sell too. So I think we have flexibility with the Taylor Swift book in that if we get something commissioned, they'll use it because they expect all the Swifties will want to buy it.
Yeah, like good cover design can help.
Things on our website. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Introduction. So, Stardew Valley kind of came out, in 2016, but at sort of an interesting moment, as we had been seeing. Really, it wasn't brand new, but we'd been seeing a lot of interest in like farm to table restaurants and back to nature living, and certainly moving into the pandemic a few years later, like just like homesteading. I think of early isolation, how many people were like, I have a sourdough starter now, or they were like, they're like baking their own bread and like taking up cross stitch, or like doing these things that are a little bit more like a slow pace of life because so much had been cut out suddenly. Which meant I ended up playing a lot of Stardew, basically from the beginning. But I continued during the pandemic. And there has been work on Animal Crossing: New Horizons being like that serendipitous release of right before things went into lockdown, and everyone kind of like went into these areas to escape. So you're right that farming sims. So Harvest Moon originally from 1996 for the Super Nintendo, but has been a whole series. Later became Story of Seasons due to stuff. There was a split in the company. It's a complicated story. Farmville on Facebook. Anyone remember Farmville? I tried Farmville hoping it was going to be more like Harvest Moon, and then I didn't really like the mechanic of it.
Yeah, neither did I.
And I hated the, like, you have to try to get your friends involved to, like, get in-game currency or, like, make things I hated that. I'm like, I just want to play a single-player game. Like, it kind of, like, was anxious for me. Initially, I was like, oh, Farmville looks really cool, and I played it for a little while, but, like, I didn't stick with it. So anyway, all these games offer a compelling way to challenge players to confront and reevaluate their own preconceptions that the, quote, digital and natural are mutually exclusive concepts. So often we separate these things, right?
Yeah, and that ends up being the underpinning of the book I'm working on, kind of remixing environmental information in various different types of audiovisual media. And it definitely was influenced by my work with Schaefer, both the work for my dissertation, but also actually working with Schaefer and his kind of penchant for rejecting technology. Like literally, when I first getting in touch with him, I sent him my undergrad paper on his work, and I sent it by print mail, and then he called me up on the phone, and then I called him back and had to leave an answering machine message, and he liked letters, and only later in life actually got an internet connection because his partner was going back to school, kind of very reluctantly. And so kind of engaging with his work and his kind of personal views towards kind of modern technologies, primarily of communication, but also recording, I really wanted to think about, well, how can we bring these concepts into these other spaces, but also concepts like soundscape have been picked up so widely across various types of music and media, that it has this particular kind of origin in his work, but has become increasingly usable and meaningful, departing from his particular use of it.
Laughing at Pete in the chat. Diablo has cows and you farm them for items. Farm game, right? Well, by that logic, when we talk about like farming enemies in a JRPG, I guess all those are farm games too. So instead of grinding, we can just talk about farming stuff. So I guess they're all it's all farm games. It's all turtles all the way down. Yes, there is a cow level. Yes.
It's like you could do that on your spring break.
Yeah. I was just thinking this is kind of like related and unrelated to your chapter. I follow a couple jewelers on Instagram that specialize in like antique and estate jewelry. And one in particular is Erica Viner. I don't know if they do it the German pronunciation, but they're very interested in a lot of like kind of macabre stuff. So like mourning jewelry, like jewelry made out of baby teeth and stuff, which was like a celebration of the kid not dying in infancy, right? Reaching long enough to actually lose their teeth. But they did a post recently about the history of scarab jewelry and, of course, all the Egyptian connections, but how in ancient Egypt, they didn't tend to make the jewelry actually out of the beetles. But in the Victorian era, there was this kind of like sense of loss due to industrial revolution, and so there was all this obsession with naturalism, and that like we're going to actually put the beetles in settings and use them now, and these jeweled beetles with that vibrant green, that there are these ways to try to reconnect with a sense of being lost from the natural world. And so there's kind of like a similar impulse here that like obviously we've been living in like urban and suburban spaces for a long time, but that like this type of game has gotten so popular. It's kind of an interesting impetus for us. We could just, I don't know, start a garden on our balcony in our apartment, or, like a container garden or in our backyard or something, but so many people would rather just play this type of game.
Yeah. And well, I'm writing in a separate project right now about kind of, that's a disability studies focused project about, there's so many interesting kind of environmental art projects that are media focused that are trying to get at issues of access, because so much of the kind of foundational environmental art required you to physically go to those locations, have access to a car, so particular kind of socioeconomic status, to be able to take time off work to go to, like one of Schaefer's Patry performances, can you leave and drive 3 hours and stay overnight to wake up at dawn, and then sit through a 3 to 4 hour performance? But also, what can we do within a video game or an interactive internet installation that also gives you access to another representation of the natural world or natural phenomenon, or kind of problematizing what is natural, what is digital in really interesting ways, where it still has access issues in terms of like you need to have access to internet connectivity, but it potentially gives access to another kind of community that is invested in the same issues and questions and experiences.
Yeah, really good point here in the chat. The corn song that went viral using Stardew sounds. I'm glad somebody brought that up. It was going to come up at some point, but Yep.
It's also like in the intersection of like my video game music research and like the internet music research, but it's like
all the
when
meme
memes and
stuff.
Stardew and they mix.
I follow
Yes.
a couple like Stardew specific meme accounts. They're great.
Oh, nice.
They're real great. I'll have to send you some of them actually, because I don't know that I have. There's so many good ones that I have just like permanently saved on my device.
Can Kate make a conference paper out of it? Probably.
Maybe. There's some really good ones.
It's the final day for our internet musicking call for papers today, so I have that on my mind at the same time.
Yes. I was trying to come up with something for that. Maybe I still will. We'll see. We'll see what happens after we get off the call later.
And if you need like extra day or two and you talk to me, we can probably wiggle it.
Yeah. I will try to be there no matter what, even if I don't give anything. But I love the concept. I'm very excited for that. So this is what I've decided your walkthrough and thesis is.
It's find Kate's thesis is often the case.
Well, also as I joke to my students, y'all make it really easy when you say in this chapter, because you're like, oh, that's the walkthrough right there. There it is.
That probably wasn't my choice to put that there.
Yeah, and this can be an editorial thing, right? That sometimes authors are like, I prefer to do kind of more of an inductive, like walk you through the garden path, than having this kind of. Some folks find this a little stilted to do, like in this chapter I will, in this paper I will. But a lot of editors, I think, are increasingly moving toward it, just because it's really good for somebody trying to skim the article for research to just have like a snapshot right toward the beginning of the chapter or the article. So it kind of increases almost like the SEI of it. SEO, search engine optimization, whatever. Yeah, like the tell me what to expect. I also think that there's just like an increased push, especially in like media studies, to make our prose, accessible and not overly academic-ese and full of jargon and super esoteric. So, but you have a beautiful outline here. In this chapter, I focus on the sound culture of the popular indie farming simulator Stardew Valley and how its game audio reconnects players with nature and ecology using music and environmental sounds that model ecological principles and facilitate ludic interaction with the materiality of nature. That was supposed to be dots. Comma, chameleon. We need to listen in many different ways with different sets of ears to fully understand how and why digital worlds and the world around us sound the way they do and what these sounds mean. Pauline Oliveros left us with the lesson that listening is a form of activism, a tool for understanding difference, increasing mindfulness, and facilitating environmental awareness. What a beautiful sentence. Drawing on autoethnographic fieldwork, I examined what I heard in the acoustic ecology of the game, the player and avatar's relationship to these soundscapes, and how my ways of listening to the game world informed my playing and understanding of Stardew Valley's narrative and ludic design. Ooh, hi Jordan. What do we have here? Similar rights of like, yeah, there's Factorio. Factorio exists.
Yep.
You want to spend hundreds of hours building a factory? Yeah, there's really not as much of the like you're just one worker in the factory operating the drill press. That's true. You're kind of usually like more godlike. It's kind of more akin to like a strategy game. Yeah, some forms of labor get romanticized, others not. That's a really great point. Yeah. There's something about this like pastoral like connection to the land and, all the noise and the busyness and the rush of modern life. Of course, that's been going on for like hundreds. There's like stuff in ancient Egypt. Like there's writings that talk about how the world is so much faster than it used to be. Like this goes back to ancient times. It's really striking when you see that written. You're just like, what? What are you talking about? Like you're still dealing with like the Nile floodplain and like agrarian calendars and like you're still saying that like life is too fast. And it didn't used to be. So it's an interesting concept, but the dark old Stardew version. You don't ever have to clean the chicken coop in these games. Yeah.
Nope.
There's a lot of farm labor that looks nothing like this. And of course the idea that like you can just plant all the squares that you want on your big open land, but like you're maintaining that with like a watering can. Like, come on. Like, I know you get sprinklers later on, but like, even those, they're like so small. You have to get so many of them. It's like, this is not how commercial farming is. If they made it look too much like commercial farming, then suddenly we start looking like Joja, right? Like,
Yes, exactly.
then we start looking like the corporation that we got away from. So, yeah, we are absolutely valorizing a much more community oriented and kind of small scale form of farm labor for sure. It's more like backyard gardener style than actually like running a working farm.
Yeah.
And the
And
idea that
surprisingly, you can
it's only
sustain
you.
yourself.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can do multiplayer where you have farm hands that have their own cabins or whatever, but like it's pretty much like you're running the whole farm. And if you get married, your spouse will occasionally be like, "I fixed a fence for you." You're like, "Okay, cool."
It's like, just go back to working out in the back room.
You're like, I did 18,000 tasks today and you put water in the cat's bowl. Like, congratulations. Anyway, so the methodology here and a little bit of intro to Stardew itself. Methodology employs gameplay field work, which I just love the idea of thinking of the play sessions itself as field work. I think we saw this a bit in especially the last two chapters of Will Cheng's book,
Yeah, definitely.
with the online gaming and sort of thinking of like ethnography and field work in those spaces, using a lot of thick description, auto ethnography. So you kept a journal and you have excerpts that you quote throughout.
Literally, I had a little bit that was word processed, but I usually have a notebook, primarily coming out of like when I was doing Schaefer research. We were in the woods, and I wasn't for months on end. I really didn't have access to my cell phone or laptop or anything like that. So I had a lot of notebooks and pens and pencils in my tent. So I kind of continued that on with a lot of handwritten notes. And I also still handwrite a lot of my papers in sections before actually typing them up, which is probably an unnecessarily slow process, but kind of extends from that kind of printed page to processed page.
I love that. And, you know, I've seen studies before in terms of note taking for classes that there's something about the kind of mixed modality using the handwriting. That it sinks in a different way. You synthesize it in a different way than you do. And also you just can't, like, I can type very fast. So if I'm taking notes with a computer, I can catch a lot. And folks that see my live tweeting know that I can catch a good amount, not everything, but a good amount. Versus if I'm handwriting, you're having to synthesize because you can't catch it all. You have to make a decision about what to put down. So yeah, I think that there's something to that. And I think that manifests in terms of like your ability to do this thick description and like just what results from your process being what it is. Yeah, so Stardew Valley, Chucklefish published it in 2016. This game is also something that, like, just personally, I had just started like seeing Joe, and kind of heard about this game coming out, and you know, I think he got it for me on Steam initially. Like, it was a gift because I had talked about how like Harvest Moon was a huge part of my childhood. The Super Nintendo cartridge was the first game I bought with my own money. I saved up for it, you know, the $60 or whatever it was. And this game is such a love letter to everything that Harvest Moon felt like it could be, you know. Such a good game, designed by Concerned Ape, as he's credited in the game page, but we now know is Eric Barone, who took 4.5 years to design, program, animate, draw, compose all the music for, record, and write all the components. So this is a very like auteur indie game, right?
Yeah, and I'm realizing like one of the articles I have coming out in the next couple months is on A Short Hike, which is also very similar. There was like, of course, like the addition of like Adam Robinson, you working with Mark Sparling for the soundtrack, but realizing I do a lot of these very like single auteur games from the indie collection as well. I gravitate towards them.
Yeah. I'm just noticing, you know, Andrew's saying about the escapism nature of video games. We don't see an 8-hour office workday because, like, I even think of like when I send my sim to work, my view stays on the house, right? And then, oh no, a burglar's showing up and no one's at home or whatever is happening. So, yeah, absolutely. There's like there are games like Papers, Please that are a little bit more that type of labor, but they certainly aren't the norm, and they can be popular in like they can kind of strike once, I think, or it doesn't seem like a genre that's gonna really continue, because at some point like you have to have a gameplay mechanic that feels fun too, like even if there's repetition involved, and most gameplay has some form of repetition. There's ways in which it can feel more or less repetitive depending on what you're doing. So Barone wanted players to really feel like it was a Harvest Moon game, like it was kind of an extension of everything that felt like. That not only are you nurturing the land, but you're also, there was a town nearby where you can have relationships in the community and kind of become a part of the fabric of the town as well. And there's a lot more options for folks that you can decide to get married to if you want to go that route. You can romance all of them. You can then get confronted by all of them if you romance all of them. There's a sequence where like if you get all of the bachelors or the bachelorettes to like 10 hearts, that there will be some kind of a scene where they're like, "Hey, what's the big idea?" But there's even a way around that where you can have like the rabbit foot like in your inventory, and then when they confront you, they all just laugh it off, and then you're like not in trouble. But it is in there. And I know this because I'm a completionist, so I wanted to see all the cutscenes, so of course I romanced everybody. Even though I knew from like the very first moment I started playing and I got to know all the villagers, I'm like, Elliot's the one for me. In every single farm I've done, I've married Elliot. I always think, oh, maybe I'll go for somebody else, and then I never do.
I think my situation with Alex in this case was like partially convenience in that I'm doing the research and I need to progress, and I'm going to be very focused with my attempts from the get-go to kind of get through the different stages. And what I really want to do is kind of go back and start over again, and see what will happen if I take more time, look through many options in various different capacities. But then also I'm not sure that I can bring myself to kind of start another game from the beginning again, because I'm terrible at that, and start from scratch, especially with kind of games that I also have the challenge of that they take a long time to play and advance in, and we have so many other things going on in our lives and other projects to work on. I'm like, what point will I get to in that new build?
Yeah, because just like clearing the farm, you're like, oh man. And that's when you go to like Nexus mods and you're like, I'm gonna get the tractor mod. Screw it. There are a lot of there's a really robust modding community, and when we open my game in a little bit here, you all will see I'm running 84 mods in my game.
Yeah, we are not looking at my game, which I had to abandon a few months ago to work on other things, and I haven't been back yet. I put both Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing to the side and need to pick them both up again for various projects, and I'm a little scared.
I really want, and some of you, if you saw, we did a stream that lined up, it was on my birthday a couple years ago on the Thursday night stream, and so because it was my birthday, I got to choose, and I was like, we're doing Stardew. And so I gave people a tour of some of my farms, because I have 3 that are pretty developed, and then like, because I wanted to try all the different farm types, so I have like kind of one on each farm type. And so I was like giving people tours and everything. So we'll see a little bit of that. But it meant that I've played the game long enough and so many hours in it that I started to want to extend the content for myself. So I don't really do like the easier fishing mod type stuff, although I know that's out there. There's a lot of things that like make it accessible, make some of these different things like easier or harder, which isn't to say that I don't have anything that makes the game easier. Like one of them I have, if you open the map, it shows you where the NPCs are. So if you're like going to gift stuff, you kind of know where they are at that moment. And that was just to save time looking up the Stardew wiki to be like, okay, where, like, what time of day is it? Where are they? So I do have things like that, but a lot of them are just like more crops that I can plant, like just adding more variety. I have like dialogue expansions so that you're not just getting the same dialogue over and over. So a lot of it is just like expanding. And I've never done one of the big ones is Stardew Valley Expanded, and that one doesn't really play well with a lot of these other mods, and that's the only reason I haven't done it. Like if I'd done it first, I probably would have lived in it. But that one adds like entirely new, like another town you can go visit, and like new people that you can marry, and like new cutscenes. Like that one's pretty loved and robust. So it's a very modded game, and it's something that Eric Barone is very aware of. I just saw for the 7th anniversary him saying that like the next patch for this game is going to be adding some modding support. So there's recognition of like this is a way to kind of keep this going beyond any official updates that he makes.
Yeah.
And of course, he's working now on Haunted Chocolatier, which I'm very excited for. So he's going to be turning attention to that as well. But I think one of the reasons this game is so loved, not just on its own merits, but also the community has like really embraced Barone because he's always put out the updates for free. There's no DLC. Like he's just constantly giving himself to the players, and everybody just is like, we love you. Please keep going. I've gifted copies just to like make sure that like I'm buying stuff and supporting him. Like definitely somebody I like to support. So like Harvest Moon, some things are similar, but then there's also an expansion of a lot of the things that were in the original Harvest Moon. More flexibility, range, goals, activities, and time in the world. Because Harvest Moon, the original, I think you got 2 years, and then mom and dad would come and see how you were doing, and then you'd get your ending. And then the game was over. You did not go back and like continue. In this one, there is that same kind of grandpa's ghost comes back and is like, oh, nicely done, Darby, right? Your character was Darby. Nicely done, Darby. Like, here you go. You did it. But then you get to just keep playing forever, as long as you want. And if you have any children, they're always toddlers. They never grow up. So it's not like The Sims where you're like, oh, aging. Like, it's stressful.
It's like everyone's getting older.
Yeah. You can turn off aging in The Sims, and I often do because I'm just like, listen. I'm in here for like to escape, right? Like I don't need my Sims to like leave me. So but yeah, that's one nice thing about this game, although it is a little weird to have toddlers for like ever. You're in like year 18 and they're still toddlers. Like I guess toddlerhood feels that long, but it's
you're not paying for them to go to university at that point.
It's a little literal, right? Oh man. So quote, to facilitate interactive play during which the player parses out the ecology of Stardew Valley, a combination of social, environmental, and cultural actors, the visual, sonic, and ludic design must simplify rather than precisely replicate the biological and ecological complexities of the actual world. So there is this very powerful process here of signification, and I like that you talk about the shrinking down, the simplification.
In Alinda Chang, who I cite some of her early articles in this piece, put out the book Playing Nature, which my students have read chapters from for various of my game sound classes. And she primarily, there's not a lot of sonic content in the book, but it's excellent about talking about kind of ecological approaches in games, in nature-based games. And there's a whole chapter that's excellent on scale, where she talks about the need to kind of scale down, sometimes scale up, to kind of, or emphasize particular elements of scale and how they intersect with realism rather than others. Because a lot of the kind of pushback from those working in broadly the field of kind of environmental art against some of these kind of digital representations like games is this whole thing around realism, whether it's actually looks and feels and sounds like the natural environment, or whether it's reducing it down to some elements of signification, or it's playing with scale, which to some critics take away from that realism. But as we learned in some of the work of Mark Grimshaw has talked about this in his acoustic ecology of the first-person shooter, and I've talked about this elsewhere too, that exact one-for-one realism isn't the goal, and not necessarily the most effective way of kind of creating these interactive immersive environments, or creating an in-game argument around a particular type of environmental experience, and that the time of the game is already kind of compressed, even if you could play Stardew for forever until you die. But it's kind of necessary with the kind of the condensed time frames that we're dealing with, but also sometimes player engagement, that it takes a more compressed format, or emphasize on a particular core ecological models or mechanics, or sound examples or ways of listening to really engage the player and make them kind of notice things about this environment that they can map onto kind of other environmental experiences in their everyday lives.
Yeah, 100%. And another way to think about some of these things is that in the real world, we have, the cocktail party effect, the cherry cocktail party effect, where you have a noisy soundscape. Your brain is able to pay attention to the conversation right in front of you, assuming you have like normative hearing, right? But you learn selective attention. Your brain kind of learns how to parse the auditory stream and figure out, like, almost like you're amplifying it for yourself. Like, oh, I can kind of attune to this one, and even though the whole soundscape is super loud, I know what to listen for. And if games did that, they would be like almost unplayable, because it's this kind of flat. You can have immersive audio and like more spatialized audio, but until you have like fully perfect spatialized audio, like, games have to do the selective hearing for you. Mm-hmm. So they have to cocktail party for you and kind of make things more salient in the soundscape. And so, like, some of this reduction comes from, like, you don't want the actual soundscape. It's too much. It's too noisy. It might even be kind of stressful in this environment.
Because we've been trained as kind of listeners, either overtly or in more subtle ways, to listen for particular kind of sound signals and sonic information, and kind of learn from it and negotiate our surroundings based on that, like the sound of the crosswalk sign or a foghorn, through kind of repeat engagement. And even if we kind of play games on a regular basis, each game is kind of a different world that we're entering into, and we don't always have time to kind of learn how to listen to those environments, or that's not necessarily the goal of the game. And so it's necessary to kind of bring certain sonic information to the foreground and let it recede, kind of have it recede into the background, and toggle back and forth between different types of musical and sonic information, so that players know how to play and negotiate that world, because we don't really have a kind of our lives in the game to kind of learn how to listen to those specific and unique environments.
Yeah, exactly. But so then, knowing that this is such a norm in all of gaming, but then in these cases, then the interesting question is, how do we simplify? What are we focusing on? What are we highlighting? And then which sounds are carrying meaning versus being more of like setting an ambiance, and like, how do we read the signals being given to us? Sipping my kombucha. This also seems very Stardew appropriate. It's rosemary, mint, sage, and green tea.
Versus I'm just going through several coffees that I have off to the side that I made ahead of time.
Well, I had my coffee, and now I'm doing my kombucha. Okay, so ecology, term that people use, people kind of know, but like nice to have a definition, right? Is this pie cut?
I think it's pick. I'm terrible with pronunciations in general. Or
I run into this every time. Yeah, this is Brew Doctor. If you ever, they have them in Whole Foods. If you have a Whole Foods near you, they're good.
Yeah, I think I end up going with this definition because we can think about a definition of ecology that's primarily coming from biological sciences, or there's a lot of work in performance ecology that's kind of using this term in new ways to talk about the web of relations, as coming up here. But like in a performance, the relationships between the audience members and those on stage and the space, kind of an extension, a different way of talking about like Christopher Small's musicking, but thinking about how everyone kind of feeds off each other. And so a lot of performance ecology coming out of theater studies talks about it in this way. And Ellen Waterman, who I did my postdoctoral studies with out at Memorial University, talks a lot about performance ecology and improvisational environments in the Canadian kind of new music scene. And she also just happens to be someone who kind of came out of Schaefer's studies too. And so what I liked about this definition is that it's talking about the biological and organic and inorganic, but also technological elements. But there's also ways to think about it productively in terms of more the performance ecology sense too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of diverging from just thinking about biological components in the environment or in the game world, but he's bringing technology into it as well.
Yeah, so then having like a digital representation of nature, like it's kind of a perfect fit. So, definition of ecology as a quote web of relations and amalgamation of organic and inorganic or biological and technological elements that are interconnecting and mutually affecting. Quoted on 160. So, game design is communicating environmental issues, showing players natural processes, and showing connections in nature and consequences. So, a very simple example, if you don't water your crops, they won't grow, right? They just kind of halt. They can die. And they certainly die from season to season. You start learning, like, oh, I can't plant this too late because it takes however many days to mature. And if I don't get to harvest it, then that's a waste of money. And money is a very, very tight resource in the beginning of the game. Eventually, you can become kind of a ridiculous mega farm like some of mine. But but initially, you're like really having to count your pennies in terms of affording, the potatoes. And knowing that you're going to need to buy some corn in the next season or whatever it is. So we open with character creation. And I like the mention of Carrie Miller here that says we're like actors getting into costume to play a role in especially, like Will's pointed out, a lot of like kind of North American RPGs or like European RPGs do a lot more of like, instead of you stepping into this existing character, the silent protagonist maybe, you often get to completely design your character from the ground up. Something like Cyberpunk 2077, you can spend as much time as you want. And so we can make this character very like us or very unlike us. There's no time limit. And it opens with a cutscene of the daily grind at the Joja Corporation, so that we have the soundscape there right off the bat that is going to contrast with what we hear when we hit the farm. So fluorescent lights, this electric hum, there's air vents, there's clicking keyboards, super dreary, and the soundscape lacks vibrancy and vitality. So I have a little bit of gameplay footage that I recorded in advance. I was prepared this week. So this is me on the character creation farm. We have banjo. I tried to fit Kudomusicology. It didn't fit. So I called it Kudo Farm. Favorite thing. I think I tried to put Concerned Ape. Or no, yeah, I was going to put Stardew Valley and it didn't fit. Concerned Ape, which is actually an Easter egg. If you put Concerned Ape as your favorite thing, when you're like, what's the favorite thing? When you find star drops that increase your like stamina in the world, there's usually a little thing that says, oh, the taste reminds you of, and then it's your favorite thing. So that can be kind of funny depending on what you put at the beginning. So like in one game, I think I put hugs with a little heart symbol, and so it would say the taste reminds you of hugs. Like that's sweet, right? But if you put Concerned Ape, there's actually a thank you message that will play, like. Like from Eric being like, oh, thanks, that's cute. So then you pick your farm type, and I was looking, sort of think about it for a second. I think I ended up going wilderness, but yeah, there's so many farm types now. Originally, there was just one big open rectangle, and then one of the updates introduced the different terrain maps, which is so fun. I recommend it. More banjo. So much banjo. It's like cowbell. Can never have too much of it. And then this image is actually from one of my more developed farms. This actually is a screenshot that's in my dissertation when I was talking about avatars and having like a custom one that was meant to kind of look like me, right? I'm very attached to my avatars. But I remember I like threw an Instagram story up being like, it would not be my dissertation without like sneaking in Stardew. Like, I at no point write directly on the music of Stardew in my dissertation, but I'm like, I'm gonna get it in there somehow. So let's see a little bit of the opening cutscene here. Click, click, click. Smile, you're with Joja. So, like, what's happening here? What is he's like licking his lips. Seems like a fun coworker. I got this kind of like sad music boxy track. So this is a note from Grandpa. Like, you want to get back to nature probably. So here, you have the deed. I want to know who's been paying taxes on the farm this whole time that you have not been opening the letter from Grandpa. Grandpa really said touch grass. Exactly. Exactly. And then it kind of loads from there. And then we, of course, land in the actual farm. We'll tour mine in a minute and like do an actual sound walk. But Kate's avatar, what did the name Darby come from?
So it's both my mom's maiden name, but also the name of my horse when I was a teenager. So kind of doing, which also was like taking it from that. It's also now the middle name of my niece. So they were asking my mom if it was okay to kind of put it as of Eleanor's middle name, and I was like, but it's also the old horse's name. They didn't like that so much. But so it's like kind of has that dual, because I didn't ever thought about making an avatar that wasn't kind of didn't have these personal connections. So I didn't name it after me, but I named it Darby, so it had that personal connection. It also has purple hair, which that was like my short-lived purple hair stage. My hair did not like it, so that's kind of a archival moment of myself in like 2020. Well, it was been like 2016, 2017. In the middle of writing this, and yeah, so it was like at Fuzzy Acres Farms, I think was just, I didn't really know what to name my farm, so I think that just kind of came from just thinking about something cute.
You want to know what my farm? Actually, I think most of my farms have the same name, and it actually came from like a text conversation with Will Gibbons. What should I name my farm? And he said, oh, obviously 50 Shades of Hay. So all of my farms are 50 Shades oh hay.
Laughing and drinking coffee on stream.
Yeah, I picked a good moment. Yeah. Oh, if you think that's the end of the puns, wait till we get to what I named my cows and chickens and livestock in the game.
Oh, right.
I'll do a dramatic reading.
Mine are probably less inventive because I was thinking the entire time I'm working on this for publication.
Yeah, whereas I was just like going with abandon. So yeah, you open Grandpa's letter, you inherit the farm, you get a sense from the field notes about working with Darby instead of just controlling Darby, which is kind of a cool. Can you speak to that for a sec?
Oh yeah, and it led to so many disastrous slippages in writing when I was working with Will and Steve, because I was going between the first and third person it very interchangeably, which was the way I was thinking through it, but also having trouble kind of segmenting when I was thinking of myself as Darby, when I was writing about it as myself, the player. And it led to a lot of kind of complications in the language in the text itself, but it was very much reflective of like how I was listening and how I was kind of negotiating the world and thinking about these different positionalities, which I know it comes through in so much of the Avatar literature. I think even in Tim Summer's book, he talks about these different slippages between first and third person experience and whether you're the avatar or controlling the avatar, and how that kind of comes through and how players often talk about their gameplay experiences. And I was experiencing it in the writing in a very visceral way in the editorial process, because it was like clarifying what I mean, when it was a very real experience of like, I didn't really know sometimes what I was actually writing, what I was writing from Darby's perspective, from my perspective, but both of our perspectives and everywhere in between. So that was something that was challenging to really think of as a writer, and I still have trouble with that when I'm thinking more about this kind of first person kind of ethnographic experience, and how to actually articulate that and have my own positionality there, but also realize there are things that the avatar is doing and experiencing through my controls, and it's less about me.
Yeah, that's true. That resonates with me partially because, again, as I've mentioned, I've actually been somewhat faithful to the same marriage candidate in most of my playthroughs. There's something romantic about Elliot. I know the long hair can be a turnoff for some, because he's got kind of the Fabio 1990s romance novel cover hair. But I liked that he was a writer and he kind of quotes poetry at you and stuff. And so I appreciated that. I think if I hadn't gone for him, I probably would have been a Sebastian person, because he was kind of, the nerd who plays D&D and is a programmer, and like, I liked that. But like, Sam read to me as too young for me. Like, he seems like he's almost like still in high school, because he's like living with mom and dad, and like, has the younger brother, and I don't know, like, there was something about that. Whereas like, I know Karen always marries Harvey, the doctor. So it's interesting, like, who we end up choosing, and sort of what different things like stood out about those characters. But when I've made comments about like, oh, my husband and all my playthrough, Joe has actually like joked like, I'm jealous of Elliot. Like, you need to like make sure there's a good separation here. I don't want to be jealous of this like 16-bit character, right? Oh, Krobus Rumi, great choice. Yeah, that was something that was not original to the game, and eventually that was like patched in, where you could ask Krobus to be your roommate. I don't know why you can't just marry Krobus, but roommate's kind of cool too. It would be kind of fun if there was an option to have like one or the other. Like, you could ask any of the regular candidates to be your roommate instead of just your spouse. That would be kind of cool. Yeah, it was one of the updates. Yeah, Alex is kind of the high school football player, like captain of the football team. He often is tossing a football around, but he does have a dog, so
maybe I'm trying to think back at some of my decision. I was like, maybe it was the dog.
Yeah, and he has kind of a sweet story arc.
He was just always around.
Well, if I remember, he's orphaned, and that's why he's living with his grandparents, right?
Yeah. It's like, I need to this. I'm so rusty. I need
there's
to
some
go back
surprising
and play more
like
Stardew.
There's some surprising like depth to some of the different storyline, like cutscene storylines for the different characters, to give you a really interesting taste. And then there's ones that are like, Shane's story is pretty intense because it deals with addiction and depression. So some of them are a lot deeper, and for some people that's the appeal, is there's this sense of like progression and growth and real emotional connection happening there. So decisions that Kate made, conditioned to how Darby developed the farm, of course, and explored Stardew Valley's ecosystem, to find her place within it. All the while, I listened to its soundscape and considered my own relationship to my environment on the other side of the screen. So I won't read an exact prose, but it is interesting that we develop a relationship with the game world, with the nature, with its sound, where yes, we're playing the role of a farmer, but we're also kind of learning the mechanics of nature as they are, again, like simplified and condensed down into this game. You're figuring out how to make the farm what you want it to be, sort of the timelines that you have to adhere to, the chores that you're going to have to do, and kind of your rotation, right? Like, just figuring out your schedule of like, oh, it's raining today, so that means the time I would normally be watering my crops, maybe I'll go to the mines today, and see if I can get a few more floors down. So your whole like shape of life is kind of guided by what's happening in the natural world. And of course, in winter, you're not tending crops, so then you're opened up to do maybe, I've been neglecting like getting to know the townspeople, building my friendship meters, like Maybe I'll do more gift giving. Maybe I'll tend more animals, assuming I've built up enough hay. Gosh, that's always scary when you're like, I'm running out of hay and Marnie's closed right now and I can't buy more hay. What am I going to do?
Oh no, the ponies.
Yeah, exactly. So you cite here, kind of talking about digital nature, Lawrence Buell on environmental
Yeah,
texts.
kind of a literary eco-criticism scholar. So some of my citations come more from kind of sound studies and ecology, and then some kind of ecology and games. And then for the purposes of this piece, but also kind of where I was in my kind of research in the moment, kind of moving more into what I do now, I was still reading a lot of kind of literary eco-criticism that are mostly talking about written texts, but kind of the journals and conferences coming out of literary eco-criticism also are dealing a little bit with kind of media environments. So one of the Alenda Chang books, I mean articles on farming simulators that I cite is from one of the journals that is primarily in literary eco-criticism, but was kind of bringing a series of media texts into that conversation.
Yeah. I was going to say, as the mention of Room with Linus, there is a point where you can offer that to Linus, and Linus is basically like, no, I like my tent. Like, I'm like connected to nature. There are mods that allow you to have Linus as a roommate, and there's mods that allow you to basically, like, in case you really wanted to, get with Clint, the blacksmith or something, there are mods that allow you to marry or ask it to be a roommate, like the non-marriageable candidates. So if you wanted to, like, I don't know, Linus or Clint or Caroline or like the folks that are already married, you can like get them to leave their spouse and come be with you, like Robin. So there are mods for that, but they're not. There's only 10, I think, or 12 candidates in the town, so there's more folks. Extra heater for Marnie and put it in Linus's tent. Yeah, I mean, there's something to like. I've seen people like decorating the area around it. Like you'll see I do a little bit of that too. There's some decoration I do in the cave, going down to the mines where like the dwarf is selling. He has his little shop. I've like decorated that. Some of us are very into the aesthetic. So especially late game where you have a lot of money and you're like, I can kind of do anything I want. You just like go for it. Yeah, he's a bro. So what's nice about this game is this is not about like extracting resources until the land is sucked dry, right? Like there is resource extraction that happens, and you have some writing about this that I hope you turn into an article soon.
It's definitely
or it goes in the book.
I'm thinking it might end up in this just because of the stage it's in. It might go in the Soundscapes book just because it'd be kind of convenient to do that at this moment.
Honestly, like having seen the early draft of that, like it talks about Soundscapes so much, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was thinking about that or my own book, but then one of my spring break decisions is like what's going where and a few kind of lingering things.
Yeah, because that one's really strong. I can't wait to see it come out. So anyway, so it's not like you don't do things to the land and transform it, but there is an emphasis on this game of like being a part of the land, and you have a moral responsibility to contribute to its ecology. There's a lot of kind of textual in-game references to you kind of restoring the farm, taking care of the farm, bringing it back from a state of wildness. And then you can kind of choose how you want it to look from there. You can have it be still pretty wild and still considered cultivated. So it's not like you have to raise the whole thing. You can still decide where you want to have trees and where you want to plant stuff, where you want to have different farm buildings. So there's a lot. Yeah, the sushi recipe is clutch. So games, of course, don't substitute for actually touching grass. We know this. This is why this phrase exists on the internet. But they do afford access. I think this is such an important point for those that can't experience nature. There could be physical obstacles. There could be geographic or socioeconomic limitations to actually getting out into nature. If you're living in an area that doesn't have a really good, like, park near you,
Yeah, and I've had several because I teach a lot of RPI summer courses it's extra pay. It keeps me on a schedule in the summer, and doing listening exercises outside for some of them. And I've had several students who are allergic to grass and have to lie down on the pavement for some of them because they can't go in kind of the quad area. And so that's something I didn't think about when I was writing this.
Right.
Is that's like allergies to grass and to like literal nature.
Yeah. Yeah, and they can be pretty serious.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending on what it is, absolutely. So yeah,
if you've got to
geography.
lie down on the really hot pavement in summer term, it's probably pretty severe.
Yeah, and if you're in a super urban area, you may have like a botanical garden near you, but like even that's a very like terrarium-y experience. You know, it's a lot smaller, and it's a certain biome that's being replicated, and like our botanical gardens here in Cleveland have basically two areas. So there are a bunch of outdoor gardens that are nice during like the nicer months, but obviously Cleveland has winter forever. So we also during the winter you are stuck with a Madagascar desert or a Costa Rican rainforest, and that's it. So you get a very specific like cultivated sense of nature, and that's due to their own like financial limitations. They can't maintain everything, right? And again, costs money to go to the botanical gardens.
Yeah.
My family has placed a real premium on like giving our daughter experiences in nature, and so we made a membership to that a priority. So that's like I always tell my parents, like, want a good Christmas present for the family, get us like renew our membership for a year and like have that be the big present. And then we go pretty frequently. But we also have in Northeast Ohio the Metro Parks, which is like internationally, I think, renowned for just being this massive park system. And they call it Cleveland's Emerald Necklace because it's like there's a valley, there's so many trees, and there's like a lot of conservation efforts and park rangers and nature centers and things just dotted throughout Northeast Ohio. So like, and we live right near one of the entrances. So we can also just be like, we're going to drive down into there and like hike for a bit, you know, take a nice long walk. So we're really lucky where we are. So anyone that like makes the Cleveland jokes, like these are the types of things. I'll talk about the Cleveland Orchestra. I'll talk about our art museum, you know, being world renowned and free. You know, I'll talk about having these like access to nature. But depending on where you are, when I was even doing grad school, there was a botanical garden that was actually pretty cool. But it was a little out of the way, kind of hard to get to from where I was. And I didn't have a car pretty much until the end of my grad school journey. So yeah, there could be geographic and socioeconomic limitations. So a game like Stardew, it's not a substitute for nature, but man, it does feel good just be surrounded by these. Mm-hmm. And you've done some other work even on like apps. Like most recently you talked about Coffeetivity with your I was going to say Coffee Talk. That's the name of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've been doing work with Coffee Talk, and I was like kind of thinking about something that was not kind of like quote unquote kind of nature-based games, because a lot of them that I've been working on are nature-based games, whether it's Proteus and its particular digital nature, or Stardew Valley, or Animal Crossing, or a Short Hike. There's a theme, but even like Never Alone and games in that vein too. A lot of like great outdoors, but also things like Firewatch and yeah. So it was kind of like, let's get into kind of an urban environment themed exploration.
And as I've said, I loved that paper. I was heading the program committee, so I knew it was you. I probably could have guessed, but I was the one that was anonymizing everything. But I remember that one being like really well received by the committee because I think it was just like a strong idea. And I had pretty recently binged that game over a weekend when we went to visit Joe's mom, with the baby there. When she was down in the evenings, I was like playing through it. And I also used Coffeetivity and like all of those like coffee ambiance apps.
Yeah.
But there's also all these apps that are like nature sounds, right? So kind of similar, just like games aren't substitutes, but these apps are super popular, whether as sleep aids or just as like productivity aids, where you can say, I want, rain in this specific environment, and there will be hours long recordings that you can put on and they'll loop.
There's some really great work, like Mac Hagood's book Hush. I think it's published through Duke, has a couple chapters where he's talking about kind of origins of kind of environmental sound media, and there's also a great chapter on like the sleep pillow that you could listen to through the pillow, different sounds to put you to sleep, and kind of other kind of Orphic media as he's talking about in that book. That's really another kind of interesting kind of integration of kind of soundscape design, different types of spatial environment sounds, and listening technologies.
Yeah. So in this game, you know, you aren't fighting nature. You might be fighting a little in the mines, and if you just choose to do the monster spawning farm, then you might have some slimes and things pop up on your farm. But in general, you are not fighting the land. You are tasked with maintaining it, nurturing it, making it better, cleaning it up, waiting for it to grow and restore, which is pretty cool. Ooh, Andrew's got a question. General question that simultaneously plays into my bias. Oh, that's always where our questions come from. As we have this discussion about the connection with the avatar, are we, as humans and players, essentially attempting to make the simulation more real? We previously made note of the general escapism afforded by video games, but in making ourselves closer to the avatar, does that allow us to come closer to making the fantasy more real as well? That's a good question.
I don't know. there's definitely a little bit of that, but I think we as players only want it to be so real as well. I think is why we don't tend to encounter a lot of games using like excessive amounts of actual field recordings, unless the field recordings are being highly manipulated to make like other sounds, like the sounds of dinosaurs from bird recordings and things like that in games, and other media, like all Jurassic Park. And yeah, I'd have to think about that question a bit more, Andrew.
And different players might have different thresholds for how real they like me saying I need to turn the Sims aging off. There are plenty of people that like the idea of getting to see a life cycle, and maybe have a little bit more separation, like, oh, it's just some code, right? There's that desensitization where you're like, I'm not, you know, in a first person shooter, like ultimately I'm not shooting a person, I'm shooting code and graphics. And similarly, like, it's really interesting to see their entire life cycle and how they change and develop. And then the idea of like having multiple generations and having this like kind of epic storyline. Some people really like that element. Some people find it very anxiety inducing and like it's a little too real for some of us. And that's why there's a slider bar to like turn that off or slow it down. So yeah, I think there could be a degree to which individual players might want things more or less real and may kind of put themselves in the avatar in more or less real ways. Like their identification with the avatar could be more or less intense depending on how much they like want to feel like they're in that space. I don't know. Some really interesting ideas. Avatar theory is such a rich branch, right? Because it draws on notions of interactivity and insert metaphor, immersion, incorporation, whatever you like. Gets into all of these theories of identity and mediation, and it's rich. And I barely speak to it in my dissertation. Like, I'm just like, this is a big area, right? Like, it's its own thing. It's a huge piece. But yeah, I imagine that there's a spectrum of potential answers to Andrew's question. Yeah. So, sound design makes this environment realistic. It is, of course, thoughtfully planned, including all of the different layers of sound and music and the cycles. So we have different things playing in different weather. We have different things playing from day to night. And the gameplay then resembles a sound walk. So the idea of pausing to listen in certain, not literally pausing, because there's not really a pause function. You can go, because if you go into your menus, time still passes. So
yeah, exactly. So just kind of literally like pausing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which
just
is not
just
really
making
what
that
you're
clear for the folks that aren't as Stardewy. In Harvest Moon, time wouldn't pass in buildings. That no longer happens in this game. But also the length of a day is a bit longer. I think it was 90 seconds, or it was like a really silly amount of time in the original Harvest Moon. You're like, how did I get anything done? It's like, I don't know, a couple minutes max. Here, I think a day is about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was about 15 minutes or so. And there's still this expectation that you're doing things because you only have so much you can get done in that 15 minutes. And
you have a hard stop bedtime at 2 a.m.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of kind of physical space to traverse to get from one thing to the next, and so you got to plan out your day spatially. So to actually take some time off to just listen, or to kind of play the game otherwise and go a different route to see what you discover and not actually complete your daily tasks. There's kind of sacrificing, maybe potentially the health of your crops, because you're not taking the time to actually water them or tend to them in that particular day, but instead you're taking a 15-minute sound walk around your farm, around town.
Yeah, yeah. And how the gameplay resembles a sound walk, pausing to listen in certain areas. You bring up Hildegard Westerkamp here, also mentioned in the Leaving Lindau JSMG article, which cites this chapter, of course. That's why there's such a beautiful pairing. Elizabeth Hamilton's chapter. So Hildegard Westerkamp, one of the pioneers of sound walking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I mentioned Andrew McCartney too,
Yep.
who she did her dissertation in ethnomusicology at York University on Hildegard Westerkamp, and they worked together quite a bit. And so Andrew McCartney, throughout her career working at Concordia University, integrated sound walking into communication studies in the sound department there, but was kind of building off and was informed by Westerkamp's work. But also there's a great chapter in the handbook of the Oxford Handbook of Mobile Media Studies, where she talks about different types of sound walking practices, like the Westerkamp tradition, but also Christine Kubish's electrical walks, but also kind of blind sound walks and getting to disability a bit.
Yeah.
And as well as her own practice of sound walking, which whenever I've been on a sound walk with her in the past in Montreal and in Newfoundland, there's a kind of a tactile element as well, where she would tell us to touch things and listen to things and get the feel for the physical surroundings, but she was guiding us, and if we were watching her as we were listening, we might kind of start adopting and adapting the same kind of behaviors of listening and touching and sensing as we walk.
I think I hear our Remy.
Yeah.
Hi,
He's
Remy.
looking at me through the door, wondering why he can't be here.
So McCartney's sound walking definition is useful as a creative and research practice that involves listening and sometimes recording while moving through a place at a walking pace. It is concerned with the relationship between sound walkers and their surrounding sonic environment. Basically, paying attention to listening while you're walking is a really, really simplified version, right? And that you note here that like the default pace in Stardew is not a particularly fast, like even when you're quote running, it's like it's not fast. It's never super fast. So day one, you didn't do any farming. You just walked around.
I was probably very bad at this game. Like I often, because this is something like Tim talks about in his work and how to study video games, is that often you need to kind of purposely die and do various things to kind of hear everything within the game. And maybe that was behind some of my decisions in playing, where it was like I had to play in different ways, both to make it a sound walk, but also to hear the environment in the ways that I was trying to explore it, and not always like play it like a farming game. And literally not doing any farming on several of the days in which I was on the farm. But there are days where you do minimal farming as well, because there's so much else to do in order to kind of advance.
Yeah, especially once you have sprinklers, like you can kind of just go off. And of course, there's the resource acquisition to have the sprinklers in the first place. It's a process. But you're noting that like the musical track that plays on that first day, Spring the Valley Comes Alive, it doesn't necessarily play everywhere on the map. It fades out in certain spots. Of course, it doesn't play at night. It's replaced by just a generic kind of cricket sound to kind of indicate the evening insects. But like the track doesn't play everywhere. It doesn't play on the seashore or beach. It doesn't play inside because different buildings will have their own tracks that play. And then you noticed, which is something I never noticed until reading your chapter, because it was so natural to me, the differences in footstep sounds on the different terrain, the pacing, pitch, and organization. Just goes to show you when you pay attention, you're like, oh my goodness, these are varied in ways that like I wasn't paying, like it just felt right. So I didn't think about it.
Yeah, that's something that Elizabeth brought up in my Animal Crossing work, is that I hadn't really experimented with different shoes and footwear in Animal Crossing at the point where I was presenting that work. And she was giving me recommendations of different types of footwear to put on to get to also change the sound of your footsteps in Animal Crossing, since I was talking specifically about how do we choose to make our sonic presence lesser or more invasive,
Oh man.
particularly through kind of like what you're extracting and what you're kind of planting in that instance, but hadn't gone to that point in actually exploring
Gosh, I have
what
to
I
open
was
that later.
physically
I
doing.
had no idea. Yeah,
I
like
forget which it is. I know I have a note somewhere back in my office, well, my kitchen table in Troy.
that's wild. I had no idea. But yeah, the sound of the stream, the grasses, the trees, and the breeze, and then of course walking into Joja Mart, ooh, versus like Pierre's grocery store that has its own like lovely track. Joja Mart is just like hum.
It's overwhelming.
It's just like the refrigeration units, and it's sterile, and everything is like bright white, and yeah. I've never done a JoJo run for all of my farms. I've thought about it just for like the completionism of getting that badge, and I just can never bring myself to do it. Like I'm okay with not doing that one particular route. And so yeah, noticing like where do you hear the music? Where is it just diegetic environment sounds? How are these things transitioning between one another? How is the balance of the soundscape shifting based on where you are? And then just continuing this practice and taking notes about it. Noting one example of the train station when a train isn't rolling through, and the bird song there, and the different layers of melodies and staccato chirps at different dynamic levels and varied timbral qualities, indicating the presence of multiple species, what Schaefer refers to as a bird symphony in his analysis of the aurality of life in the modern soundscape. Love that. The bird symphony.
And this is a very different type of digital ethnography than some of my work on kind of animal memes and YouTube fan cultures where you're into the comments and in those unpredictable spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a different type of listening, right?
Yeah.
So applying the process of sound walking to the gameplay reveals the subtle yet significant role of listening in the gameplay that's not explicitly stated anywhere in the directions for the game. The player's goals do include development of agricultural skills, completing clearly outlined tasks and quests, and socializing with NPCs and animals on the farm and in town. The game mechanics allow for flexibility and interpretation. Although the game's directions don't explicitly tell the player to take cues from the sonic environment, the avatar's success in being in the world benefits when the player listens to and analyzes to subtle sonic nuances that contribute to the complexity of their sonic environment. This reminds me a little bit of basically the argument of Ryan Thompson's dissertation. The idea that like your success at being in the game world benefits from listening, and like in some ways listening can make you better at the game. Not all games, but a lot of games have this, and it isn't talked about as much as it should be. There's what game was it? I want to say it's Monument Valley.
Yeah, which I still haven't played a lot, but I know that's one point of connection you've made before.
Yeah, one of the opening screens has a pair of headphones on it, and it says something like this game is best experienced with the sound on, because of mobile gaming, there's like usually the norm that folks are going to turn the sound off with the kind of Candy Crush thing, but they were proud of that soundscape and the music that was created for that game. I want to say it's that one. It could be one of my other like quote unquote artsy mobile games, but I screenshotted it at one point because I was just like, yes, this is all games. Like,
yeah,
all of them are better with the sound. It's not really true, right? Like there are definitely like free to play mobile games that maybe have a more slapdash approach to the soundscape, but I would say most games benefit from having the sound on. But yeah, there's definitely some really subtle sound cues, as Parabolic Zero mentions. There's an acousmatic audio cue for panning, for example. Yeah. Yeah, we'll open the title screen and the back to nature narrative. We have kind of the hewn wood font, like you can see the nails and the sprouts coming off of some of them, like they've been freshly turned into planks. So we get that back to nature narrative, and then each new season brings different wildlife, different foraging resources. The soundscape changes to indicate like different animal life and things, weather, music, which crops grow. And then you mentioned a little bit about how the music was created with Propellerhead Reason, digital audio workstation, and that the musical tracks ranged from 30 seconds to just over 4 minutes. Do you remember offhand what the shortest and longest were? Because I don't think I know offhand.
No, I'd have to go
Yeah.
back into my notes, which I should have thought to bring like that notebook with me this week.
No worries.
But definitely, it's like sitting next to many other notebooks.
I also love your very quick definitions of the seasonal music: hopeful spring, energetic summer, melancholy fall, and lonely winter. Do you have a favorite season musically?
I don't know. Like, I do like winter soundscapes in general.
Yeah.
And because there's a lot more kind of composed silence and purposeful silence, to kind of signal similarities
Space.
to actual space, the types of particular winter kind of northeast environments in southern Ontario, but also I've got a penchant for like fall.
Yeah, me too. I would agree with that. I'd say fall's probably the top for me, and then winter, and then maybe summer, and then maybe spring. I don't know. Summer and spring are probably summer and spring are kind of okay musically for me. Like they're both kind of on the same level. Like I like all of the themes, but like fall's kind of at the top of my list. I love the effects of all of those tracks. Of course, there's so many more. It's such a rich. I'm always listening to this soundtrack like all the time. And there's the newer stuff with the 1.5 update too, where you get to go to the new tropical island and you can have a farm there. You can just choose to abandon Stardew Valley if you want, because you can even have a house there and stay there, which can be complicated if you're late game on the farm that you do that with and you have like a spouse at home and you're just like living on this island basically. It's a very weird, from a gameplay standpoint, it's kind of a weird decision. But it only opens up in late game, so like in theory you've done all these things already.
Exactly.
Anyway, so mentioning the non-diegetic music at first might sound like it loops and repeats with interspersed extended non-diegetic silence or soundscape breaks, but it's actually generated at random from a set of tracks assigned to the season, time of day, and region the avatar occupies. Did you determine that based on like interviews with Barone, or did you get into the game code, or did you just like get that purely inductively by noticing?
Kind of secondhand interviews. It was definitely the timeline that I had for this project. I didn't have kind of the time to kind of do interviews with him, but it's definitely what I want to do for some of the work extending from this for other projects that I just kind of put on pause. But at the time that I was doing this research, I just moved from Newfoundland to Connecticut. Was starting in the new position then, and doing this research and a few other things at the same time. So I figured like actual interviews were not going to logically happen on that kind of time frame. Mm-hmm. So in this case, used a lot of kind of secondhand interviews because it was there was a lot of discourse and interviews with him that were available, where he was often answering the questions that I also had at this stage.
Yeah, that's useful. And I'm sure the way you were, the intensity with which you were doing like your sound walks and your journaling and your listening, like you could also tell this just from the play and then have it kind of confirmed. You also mentioned like of course there's a lot of spaces where music is a huge part of this game, and you know, like Undertale, just like it's impressive how much was composed for this. Special festivals, character events, other cutscenes all have their own music. There are certain things you might not hear over, like you'll go to listen to the soundtrack and it's, you know, something that played in one of the heart cutscenes with one of the characters, and you're kind of like, oh wait, which one was that? Versus the music that you know really well because you're hearing it almost every day or every 3 days or something. And so the music is almost continuous inside certain spaces but less predictable outdoors, where we get this kind of dynamic ambient soundscape might take over, become more salient. And so this is where you can bring in a lot of Schaefer's work on soundscape to talk about those elements.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're kind of in-game listening, the differences between the ambient and the environmental soundscape and the musical soundscape become quite blurred, or really kind of interlock and work well together, that you're not thinking of them as these two separate kind of interacting layers, and kind of thinking them and hearing them as kind of one element.
Yeah. Then you cite Rachel Caron on listening to Human-Inflicted Environmental Harm, Silent Spring from 1962, which was a statement against chemical pesticides that kill wildlife. And then Denise von Glahn called Carcinus It's Carson, right? Not
Yeah.
Karen. Carson, mistype. A skillful listener to the non-human world. And so this ends up being also a really useful thing to sort of add to the toolkit in terms of thinking about digital gaming as like
Yeah,
a
and
non-human
that
world.
in the book that comes from, Von Glund's talking about each chapter is devoted to is a different kind of contemporary American uh, female identifying composer. Oliveros, there's a chapter of Oliveros there as well, and kind of identify them all as skillful listeners, as ways in which they bring kind of the natural world and environment into their compositions in different ways. So how Oliveros does it is different than Emily Doolittle, who's different than I think Amy Beach has a chapter. Yeah, forgetting every chapter that's in there, but kind of bringing that also from Carson, and when we hear silence and when we hear sound, and coming out of even work of like Bernie Krause in terms of what is healthy and unhealthy is often based on kind of the robust soundscape versus silence, and the gradients in between.
Yeah. So more listening townspeople, like in that kind of abstract sense, building relationships, even marrying. You married Alex. And then listening to the sounds of the avatar contributing to the world, like the chopping, the mining, the different tools, the sounds of the tools, the scythe, harvesting. There's that beautiful pop sound that like is so soothing, and people have said like that's just such a good sound for that type of activity. And even like the chopping, there's a softness to it, like you have more work on like the idea of extracting resources in your Animal Crossing stuff too, that also speaks to Stardew and some of the way in which we're almost like romanticizing like this
And
kind of extraction.
And also how those soothing sounds can actually kind of tip over to the other side and become excessive because of how much we happen to be using them. So as part of the soothing sound, when does the soothing sound become a bit too intense, or when do we become conscious of the fact that it's standing in for an actual world sound that would be quite a bit harsher and maybe noticeable about and tied to the type of activity that we're engaging in?
Yeah. So yeah, this is just a kind of a good thing to think about, the idea of like the more varied the soundscape, that's often seen as, from an ecological standpoint, a sign of a healthy soundscape, that we have a lot of biodiversity. Silence is a sign of human devastation of habitat. So it is notable like how relatively silent Joja is. Like we have the electronic hum, so we have this kind of non-human element in there, but like we aren't hearing the natural world in that space. And that's a very clear representation of the sort of nature versus technology narrative, meta-narrative in this game as well. And then Schaefer has asked basically, are we actually experiencing soundscape passively? It's happening around us. We're not a part of it. To what degree are we actually a part of it? Are we composing it? Maybe even just through the act of choosing to listen to it. And performers responsible for giving it form and beauty, and how this idea shaped your approach to farming, that you made choices to not incessantly just do the same action over and over and over and over, that you were trying to vary your play a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And I know my gameplay choices partially based on the type of investigation I was doing at the time of playing through for the first time, but also informed by work I'd previously done, that these are things that I was thinking about actively going into gameplay in a way that other players might not be thinking in this particular way, or they might be approaching it this way, but not as conscious of it, or not as kind of academically grounded, you could say.
Yeah. That there's no voice acting. We get text on screen for any vocal utterances. We get wildlife. We get actions of the player, footsteps, tools, but never voices. There are sounds of other human sounds of things like doors opening, and the idea of how those strike differently, because voice acting has a way of kind of swallowing a lot of soundscape because our attention directs to it in certain ways. So making a choice to have everything except the voices does focus your sound sound world in different ways. So you mentioned like being in JoJo. We'll walk in a moment here. We'll go into JoJo and we'll go into a couple other spaces. But yeah, the JoJo remains the same. There's monotony. There's relative silence, and just our footsteps and how they sound on the tile floors versus in other the ones that are more like we're sinking into like a dirt.
Or like the wet sand on a rainy day on the beach.
Yeah. So the different sound effects. And then the saloon has this one kind of interesting moment of rupture that we have the jukebox. So now the non-diegetic kind of becomes the diegetic because the player can then call up sounds from anywhere. And so this ends up complicating the notion of diegesis, since before this we might just assume it's all non-diegetic. Nice little moment of rupture, but also just a popular feature in games to have some kind of like, oh, now you have a jukebox. And at some point, I don't remember if it's a reward for relationship with Gus, but he'll eventually give you like a recipe for a mini jukebox that you can build in your house and do the exact same thing. So you can choose to have your house scored with anything you want. Shape your own soundscape. So our conclusion here, and then we'll hop into Stardew for a moment. I won't keep Kate too long because I want to be mindful, but we'll do a little bit of demo. In RPGs, we play a role and try on a new identity in a digital environment that is equally new to us. In Stardew Valley, this is a role that reminds humanity that they are not at the center of everything, and the player and their avatar is but one individual in an assemblage of actors in this networked ecosystem. This audible focus on the non-human world draws the player's attention away from simply the act of looking and refocuses their gameplay to include other sensory observations of the game's environment. Yay! Oh, I'm glad Remy's. So you can't get up anyway.
No, I'm stuck. He's settled. He comes and goes, but mostly he's settled in on my feet.
All right, we're going to switch over. Here's Stardew. Oh, because I've had it up so long, it did the natural fade. That's funny. Let me switch over the share for you. So yeah, we don't get the little pastoral. Do you see it now?
Yep.
Cool. There we go. It like faded out. I had it muted because it was
decided you're done farming for the day.
And one of the reasons I had it like ready to go, partially so I could just click a button, switch it over, but also sometimes it takes a while to load with the mods, as it's doing right now. Uh-oh, not responding. That's scary. Do I have to reload this anyway, even though I tried to do this in advance?
This is what happens when we try to be prepared.
Close the program. Okay, fine. It's reporting the problem to Microsoft. Don't worry.
That's not going to do any good.
All right, we'll try. Well, at least we'll get to hear the thing again. All right, we'll let it load.
Like more banjo for Pete. Yes, compatibility. It'll be really interesting to see the new the teased about updates that will. I'm curious whether there'll be some kind of like unofficial menu for managing mods, like some kind of like a mod manager within the like, because the post was able to be in Dana's banjo voice. The post was able to be a little bit ambiguous. Like it just says support for, how vibrant the modding community has gotten. So I'm curious what that will turn into. But stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned to Eric Barone, a good person to follow on social media. Is working on a game that looks really fun called Haunted Chocolatier, where I
feel like that will be totally up my alley.
Yes. Okay, let's get game capture to actually look at the right thing. Capture specific window. This one? Maybe? Here we go. We get the beautiful intro. Do I need to reshare to you, probably?
I think so. I've also got Twitch open.
There we go.
But muted, so.
There we go.
But I can imagine the sound.
Look how pretty. And then Stardew Valley, our nice, like, homemade wooden sign, and of course the Easter eggs. You can like click different things. Oh look, Junimo's showed up. Like, there's different things if you click different spots. You get like confetti and ooh, fun. Okay. Oh no, the same thing might be happening. I have too many mods, everybody. I just opened this the other day, so I don't know what let me look at my mod manager really quick here and see if there's anything it's saying is game breaking. There's nothing. It's just one thing I could. Ah! I didn't do that. that did it itself. Okay, well, I was gonna sound walk for us, but I guess my Stardew is messed up. Too bad. Oh well. Go play Stardew. It's wonderful.
I know our assignment for you all is to sound walk some Stardew.
And I will fix my mods yet again, and figure out what's wrong. I really should pare them down probably at some point. But before we go, I did promise that I would tell everyone the names of my cows and chickens. So I do have a note that has those.
For those who stayed to the end.
For those that stayed to the end.
This is your reward.
This is the Easter egg, as you get to hear the ridiculousness. All right, let me find my Stardew.
I also always have my students do a sound walk in a game of their choice. A lot choose Minecraft, of course.
Mm-hmm. That's a good choice.
But I also get a lot of games that are probably very hard to sound walk in, where you just end up dying multiple times because you're not doing anything else and actually shooting.
Yeah. I know, because there's so many like rich soundscapes, but in games where like you really can't stay inactive either, so it can be really hard. And then it's like, well, you can record it and then listen back to it, but you know, it's kind of better to be listening in the moment. Okay, Stardew animals. Let's start with chickens. So these are across multiple save files, but I made a decision pretty early on that every single animal was going to be a pun. So the chickens, I have Hen Solo and Princess Leia, because she lays eggs. Kylo Hen, continuing with the Star Wars theme. I have Cluck You, Cordon Bleu, who's one of the blue chickens that you get when you have a relationship with Shane. I have Cluck Thulu, Clucky Day, Exorcist, Yolko Ono, like an egg yolk, Cluckin' A, Excellent, one of my favorites, Foul Language, Fowl. And then I have I'ma Let You Finish, like an omelet, Clucky Charm, Drumstick, and Exactly. Those are my chickens.
Drumstick.
I know. Bunnies, I have Banicula, obviously. I have Buns of Steel. I have Cinnamon Bun. I have Bun in the Oven. I have Bundle. And I have Hip Hop. So I don't have as many names for bunnies yet. Dinosaurs, which you unlock if you get a dinosaur egg. I have Yoshi, of course. Gojira, of course. I have Zilla. I have Mr. T. Rex. And Dino U? ? Sheep, I have Barbara Ann. Sheepish, Bah Humbug. Lamborghini. Ducks, I have Sir Quackers, Firequacker, Quacky Chan, Duck Norris, Oh Canarda. That one's for you, Kate. That's a French pun. That's fancy. Moby Duck, Quacker Oats, James Pond. That's a good one. DuckTales, Mallard Justed. It's like Mallard. Mallard Justed. And Quacker Jack. For goats, I have Goatee, Van Goat, Billy the Kid, Goat Zart, Scapegoat, and Goat Meal. For pigs, I have Piggy Smalls, obviously, Cole Porker, Miss Piggy, Kevin Bacon, Hamilton, Hamlet, Ham What I Ham, Piggy Pop, Crispy Bacon, Pork and Knife,
Crispy bacon's off a
Porcupine.
drumstick.
These are ridiculous. Porcupine, Pork and Knife, Albert Einswine, This Little, it's this little pig, Notorious P.I.G., which is basically Piggy Smalls, but I wanted to have both, and then Sausage Link. And then finally the cows, I have Countess, Leo DiCaprio, Utterly, Coincidence, Cowabunga, Milk for Free, Cash Cow, Hugh Heifer, Cow You Doin', Cow Are You, How Now, that one's a brown cow, obviously, Counting on You, Calf Way, Caffeinated, kind of related to your most recent paper, and finally, Dairy Air. Those are my animals in Stardew. After too many years playing this game, and too many, many, many years to come, because it is one of my favorite games of all time. And Count Dracula, that's a good one. I wonder if I have enough spaces for that. I bet I can make it fit. That's a good idea.
It's like on your Discord, everyone should start like mentioning all their animal names.
Oh my gosh, that's we're gonna make a prompt on that right now in like the main channel. Like, give me more pun names for my Stardew animals, because that's important. I love it. Well, I'm so glad
you name them. You need to think about them.
I know. I love that you published on this. As I've said, this game, when it came out, I had a lot of people being like, oh, you're going to write about it? And there was a sense of like, I love it so much, but I don't really know exactly what I want to say. Like, I probably will, and I think I want to. But this is one where I've told people there's sometimes you're like, oh, I know exactly what I want to say. Like the moment you play the game and you're like, I've got it, and I'm going to kind of be first to do it. I'm going to talk about it right at the beginning, but there are other times where I kind of want other people to give me the citations first. Like, I want to build on a foundation. I don't want to be the foundation. And this is one of those things where, because Harvest Moon and Stardew have been such a huge part of my life, I know at some point I'm going to kind of come home and do something relating to all of those games. But I'm really excited that like this is out here and gives me so many ideas and like things that I had never even noticed being a hardcore player, about like the footsteps sounding different on different terrain. Like that really shaped how I played the game and was so useful. And I know Ryan has an incredible he gave a talk at Game Sound Con a couple of years ago on Stardew's kind of 16-bit legacy, and so he's getting really in the weeds with the technical stuff, comparing like sound fonts, or like different instrumental sounds to these earlier games, and finding these stylistic similarities.
Which is work I definitely could not.
Right, it's like kind of the other side of it. So you're doing all of this, like, here's the soundscape. Not that you don't talk about the music, but then Ryan is like, here is like the nerdy stuff about the music. So then I'll be able to have that as a foundation once that's out there. And Adriana has that thesis on topic theory and stuff coming up. So like those three things will be this beautiful foundation whenever I return to it. So Mike's
next step has been to think about Stardew in dialogue with other games. It's like some publications that you're working on are very much like one case study, because you have only so many words to work with, and having multiple different examples can get complicated by giving enough, because you have to give enough contextual information if it's going to be usable to kind of a non-player audience. But it's also really helpful and exciting to kind of place a few different games in dialogue in other contexts. So that's where I've been trying to figure out, like I've got the one chapter where it's also where it's pretty much Animal Crossing and Stardew. And then it's like the other place where I'm trying to put Stardew, it's kind of trying to figure out a way to put it into the book chapter without kind of duplicating too much information, just mostly because I've got chapters that are coming from pre-published sources already. So I need to lean on some more new work there, just in case Norm is listening.
Yeah, that it won't just be won't be the same, but
Yeah.
I'm super grateful that you wrote it. I was so excited to see this, when we got the proofs and I finally got to see like what everybody else did in the book. I was like, oh, Stardew.
I also forgot it was like 2019
I
when it
know.
finally came out. I was like, this is pretty recent, and then realized not really.
This happened at one point where I referred to my Bach article like last year as having just come out the year before, and Karen was like, Dana, that was 2019. I'm like, no, it wasn't. Are you kidding me? The pandemic has like really like done weird things with a sense of time. I had no idea it had been that long since I had published that piece. It felt like it had just come out. Um,
And that's not even when you first started writing it or looking at copy edits and proofs.
yeah, that's true. Like just the process itself is so long, and sometimes it isn't, sometimes it's more compressed. It's just like it varies from project to project, but I'm grateful that this happened, and I'm grateful that this finally happened. I got to actually cover this one on Kudo because we meant to a long time ago, and then the scheduling just didn't work out, so I was just so pleased.
Yeah, and a lot of my game stuff has been like in progress in various places and not published. There's this published, there's like the Never Alone and Indigenous games work that's published in a couple places. I was realizing a lot of it is like still in progress and not like out there in the world.
Yeah, the
Soon.
pipeline takes a while, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're presenting at various conferences or you're teaching it in classes and not realizing it's not like physically on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's like my soundtrack kind of piece, but like there are a lot of the games work is kind of in the pipeline right now.
Yeah, and sometimes you like don't even have a sense of where it is, or like how recent your work is, and like then you hit this point of like trying to kind of pull stuff that maybe you gave as a conference talk, and like there's finally a good home for it. Like if anyone remembers at I think it was Michigan, my Robin Hood Prince of Thieves talk
Mhm.
is getting turned into something for George Reade. And I was like, oh, I'm really pleased to like do something with that, because I just assumed if that just is a conference paper, it's fine. But it was a neat little paper, so I'm kind of excited to work it up. But certainly it takes sometimes having the right fit and somebody asking you and you going, actually, let me dust that off and finally get it out there. But the pipeline is slow, so I've kept you for a very long time. Thank you for being so generous and giving of your
You saw
time.
something at the front window. Yeah. Well, it just reminds me. It's like the pipeline and like a Soundscapes book. We were talking at the beginning, the music and the moving image special issue or special 2 issues, depending on how things end up with reviews. Like one might come out and then the other one's in a tail issue. Like there's so much in the works right now. I know there's at least one video game chapter in like the jazz and culture special issue that I'm editing right now. So there's like the pipeline's really exciting, and when it all kind of comes out, realizing like the 23-24 academic year, we're going to have a lot more kind of soundscape oriented work out there in the world.
Yeah, and it's going to be like suddenly we're going to see so much Kate. Kate's going to be everywhere, inescapable. And it will give me more things to cover on this channel. That's the beautiful thing, is I will never run out because y'all keep publishing. So it's awesome that all these things are in the pipeline, because it gives me a lot to look forward to and come back to. And and then I always feel like I can just hold up the things I'm excited about. Like there's never going to be that moment of just like, this chapter's okay. Like there will never be that moment of just like feeling like I'm just going through the motions of covering something, because there's always something kind of new and exciting, and just like the self-care of I'm gonna feature it, so I'm gonna like sit down and read it closely and spend some time with it and like get something out of it, and then get to talk to you all about the process. It's like really cool. I get a lot out of doing this. Inescapable. Nice, Andrew.
PowerPoints.
Yes.
Notes.
Yeah, so excited. So thank you so much for being on this week.
Thank you for having me.
We've loved having you.
Technically also Remy, who's now on the couch.
Hi, Remy. So for folks tuning in the next couple weeks, this is kind of after this, we have the sort of month of the Uematsu volume. So next week is going to be Julianne Grasso talking about her work on theater rhythm, which if you saw the Stream Team stream last night, We played some of the most recent Theater Rhythm. Her chapter is on the first two. So we're going to be talking about that. And it's really good because now I've seen the game and I had no idea what it was. So
It's so sad I was on the train still.
yeah, it was a fun one. So we'll talk about that next week. The week after is going to be Stefan Greenfield Casas talking about the chapter in the Uematsu volume. And then the week after is going to be Andrew Powell's chapter from the Uematsu volume. So the Discord has my Discord has the stream schedule. Kudo schedule is the name of the channel, where there is a there's a post that lists those
it's
the
like
full
come
citations.
to the stream if you can't afford the book.
Yeah, exactly. So making sure we're doing some coverage of that new book, and then from there I might do a few more JSMG like soundtrack type articles for a bit, and then as soon as the animation book comes out, there's certain things that you all publish that I want to feature on from that. And then at some point we'll lead into the Summer of Summers. And so I'm going to have the community vote on whether you all would prefer that I do Understanding Video Games, since that's kind of a foundational text, or do we want to just like go wild and do the Ocarina of Time book to look at like, here's a way of doing a deep dive, huge book on one game. That's a possibility too. Both very valuable, but I will probably be posting polls in the not so...
It's a long summer for Summer of Summers.
It's a Summer of Summers. And then it'll be kind of similar to the Will Chang, where it'll mostly be me. Maybe I'll have guests like on with me that aren't necessarily Tim, or if Tim can pop by like more than just at the end, but we'll do kind of a similar thing where there'll be a book club and then a wrap up. And that's kind of what's coming ahead. I'm trying to book some people for April. And then we'll kind of go from there. But yeah, next few weeks are at least set. And then we'll go from there. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. Play some Stardew Valley. And, post ideas for Kaobuo Muematsu. Muematsu is a good one. That's really good. What an excellent way to end
Linking the streams.
Not crossing them. Just linking.
No.
Never cross them. Don't cross the stream. Okay. Anyway, we're going off the rails. We're going to go play Stardew. Have a wonderful weekend, y'all. See you next time. Bye.
Bye, y'all.